It sits on tables at weddings, birthdays, funerals, state dinners, and quiet nights between old friends. But few substances in human history have carried such a contradiction. Alcohol has blessed marriages and broken families. It has paid workers, financed governments, fueled armies, inspired artists, and destroyed lives. And humans have been making it for more than 10,000 years. Long before writing, long before modern cities, humans were already fermenting grain, fruit, and honey into something that changed the way they felt, and perhaps the way they lived. That is what makes alcohol so strange. It is not simply a drink. It became part of religion, trade, medicine, celebration, war, taxation, slavery, empire, and rebellion. Entire governments grew dependent on the money it produced. Entire communities were damaged by the effects it left behind. And yet, generation after generation kept making it. Why? Why did civilizations separated by oceans discover alcohol again and again? Why did rulers tax it, priests bless it, doctors prescribe it, and millions risk everything for another glass? The answer begins thousands of years before anyone wrote down a recipe, before beer had a name, before wine had a vineyard, before civilization itself had fully taken shape. Somewhere in prehistory, a human being tasted something that had fermented by accident, and that first drink may have helped change human history forever. No one knows who discovered alcohol. There was no brewer, no recipe, no invention anyone could claim. It may have begun with something far simpler: fruit left too long in the sun, grain soaked by rain, or honey mixed with water. Wild yeast, invisible in the air, would have begun feeding on the sugar and producing alcohol. At some point, someone tasted it, and then people learned how to make it happen again. What makes this story remarkable is how early that may have happened. Some researchers have proposed a controversial idea known as the beer before bread hypothesis, that early humans may have begun cultivating grain not only to eat it, but to produce fermented drinks for communal or ritual gatherings. At Göbekli Tepe, in what is now Turkey, archaeologists uncovered enormous stone vessels dating back more than 11,000 years. Some researchers have suggested they may have been used to prepare fermented beverages for large feasts. The idea remains debated, but if it is even partly true, the implications are extraordinary. Alcohol may not simply have appeared after humans settled down. The desire to produce it may have helped bring people together in the first place, encouraging repeated gatherings, the cultivation of grain, and perhaps even more permanent communities. We usually imagine civilization beginning with food. But what if celebration came first? Because once humans learned to control fermentation, alcohol would no longer be an accident. It would become a craft. And across the ancient world, completely different civilizations would begin making their own version of the same intoxicating drink. Once humans learned to control fermentation, alcohol began appearing almost everywhere civilization took root. In northern China, archaeologists have found pottery jars around 9,000 years old, containing traces of a fermented drink made from rice, honey, and fruit. In Mesopotamia, beer became so important that the Sumerians celebrated Ninkasi, the goddess of brewing, in a hymn that also preserved one of the oldest known descriptions of how beer was made. But perhaps nowhere was alcohol woven more deeply into daily life than ancient Egypt. Beer was food, payment, and fuel for labor. Workers who helped build the pyramids received daily beer rations. Archaeologists have uncovered large brewing facilities near workers' settlements, capable of producing drink on an industrial scale. Across the ancient world, the pattern repeated. Wine in Greece and Rome, palm wine in Africa, chicha in the Andes, fermented honey and grain across northern Europe. These cultures were separated by deserts, mountains, and oceans. Yet again and again, they discovered the same process: sugar, yeast, time, and intoxication. Alcohol became more than a drink. It marked rituals, sealed agreements, rewarded labor, strengthened communities, and accompanied the dead into the afterlife. But ancient alcohol had one important limit. Yeast could only produce so much before the alcohol itself killed it. For thousands of years, that natural sealing kept beer and wine relatively weak. Then humans discovered how to break it, and that would change alcohol forever. Then humans learned how to concentrate alcohol itself. The process was distillation. Heat a fermented liquid carefully, and the alcohol begins to evaporate before much of the water does. Capture that vapor, cool it, and it becomes liquid again, stronger than what you started with. Repeat the process, and the strength rises even further. This changed everything. Early forms of distillation were known in the ancient Mediterranean, but the technique was refined dramatically by medieval Arab and Persian scholars studying chemistry, medicine, and perfume. There was a remarkable irony in this. The Islamic world, where drinking alcohol was religiously forbidden, helped develop the science that would eventually make powerful distilled spirits possible. Knowledge of distillation later spread into Europe, where physicians and monks began producing concentrated alcohol for medicine. They called it aqua vitae, the water of life. It was used in remedies, herbal preparations, and medicinal cordials. Monasteries experimented with roots, spices, and plants soaked in distilled alcohol, creating recipes that would eventually influence famous liqueurs and spirits. But something slowly changed. A substance made for laboratories, pharmacies, and monasteries began leaving them. People discovered that distilled alcohol was not only useful, it was intoxicating in a way beer and wine had never been. For the first time, a small glass could deliver what once required an entire jug. Alcohol had crossed a technological threshold, and when cheap spirits reached the streets of Europe, the consequences would become impossible to ignore. The first warning came from the streets of London. By the early 1700s, cheap gin had flooded the city. It was stronger than beer, easy to produce, and sold almost everywhere. For many of London's poor, it offered a quick escape from hunger, overcrowding, exhausting work, and hopelessness. But the escape came at a cost. Gin shops multiplied. Families pawned their belongings for another drink. Public drunkenness became so visible that artist William Hogarth captured the crisis in his famous engraving Gin Lane, a nightmare of neglect, poverty, and collapse. In some of London's poorest districts, gin was being sold from an astonishing number of homes and small shops. Crime, illness, and social disorder became associated with the craze. Yet, there was a deeper contradiction. The government wanted to control the damage, but it also collected valuable taxes from alcohol. That tension would become one of the oldest problems in alcohol policy. How do you restrict a substance that is both profitable and destructive? Parliament eventually passed a series of gin acts, raising taxes and tightening sales. Consumption fell, and the worst of the crisis eased. But London had revealed something new. Distilled alcohol could now be produced cheaply, sold widely, and consumed quickly. It was no longer just a drink, it was a mass-market commodity. And once empires realized how profitable that commodity could be, alcohol would become tied to something even darker: slavery, colonization, and global power. Once alcohol became a mass commodity, empires quickly discovered that it could do more than make money. It could move people, shape trade, and strengthen political control. Nowhere was that clearer than in the Atlantic world. Rum, distilled from sugarcane molasses, became deeply tied to plantation economies in the Caribbean. Enslaved Africans produced the sugar and molasses that fed the rum trade, while merchants carried alcohol, sugar, and human beings across the Atlantic in a brutal commercial system linking Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, and North America. Entire ports grew wealthy from it. But alcohol was not only a product of empire, it could also become a tool of empire. European traders and officials used distilled spirits in commerce with indigenous communities across the Americas and other colonial frontiers. In some places, alcohol became tied to unequal trade, political pressure, and the loss of land. The lesson was becoming clear: control the commodity, and you could gain leverage over the people who depended on its trade. Russia revealed another version of that system. From the Tsars onward, vodka became a major source of state income. Production and sale were tightly regulated, taxed, and at times monopolized by the government. By the 19th century, taxes and state-controlled alcohol sales had become so important that the Russian government itself depended heavily on drinking revenue. That created a dangerous contradiction. The state could see the damage alcohol caused, but every bottle sold also helped finance the empire. Alcohol had become more than a drink, more than a commodity, even more than a cultural habit. It had become part of the machinery of empire, and eventually, reformers would begin asking a radical question: what if society tried to eliminate it altogether? By the 19th century, alcohol was no longer just a private habit. Its consequences were visible in homes, factories, streets, and courtrooms. Across Britain and the United States, reformers began arguing that drinking was destroying families, wages, health, and entire communities. The temperance movement grew rapidly. Church groups, women's organizations, workers, and political activists urged people to stop drinking altogether. Millions signed pledges. Some towns restricted alcohol, others tried to ban it completely. Then, the movement achieved something extraordinary. In 1920, the United States began prohibition. The manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic drinks were banned nationwide. Supporters believed crime would fall, families would become stronger, and a healthier society would emerge. Instead, Americans kept drinking. Speakeasies appeared behind hidden doors. Bootleggers moved liquor across borders. Illegal distilleries spread. Organized crime discovered that a banned product could be even more profitable than a legal one. Figures like Al Capone built enormous criminal empires around alcohol. Police were bribed. Rival gangs fought over territory. Violence became part of the underground trade. The government had tried to remove alcohol from society. Instead, it had helped create a vast illegal market around it. By 1933, prohibition was repealed, but the experiment left behind a much larger question. If even one of the most powerful governments in the world could not make alcohol disappear, what exactly could control it? Prohibition ended, but alcohol did not retreat. It became bigger. During the 20th century, beer, wine, and spirits were transformed into global industries. Production became industrial, advertising became sophisticated, and brands began selling more than a drink. They sold identity, Irish stout, Japanese sake, Mexican tequila, Scottish whiskey, French cognac, Kentucky bourbon. A bottle could now represent a region, a tradition, even an entire nation. Alcohol became part of tourism, diplomacy, sport, nightlife, celebration, and everyday social life. It was everywhere. And that is precisely what makes the modern paradox so difficult to see. The same substance used to celebrate weddings, victories, reunions, and holidays also contributes to disease, accidents, violence, and millions of premature deaths around the world. Governments face an old contradiction. Alcohol generates enormous tax revenue and supports major industries. Yet those same governments spend billions dealing with the health and social consequences connected to drinking. Nothing about this conflict is new. London faced it during the gin craze. Russia faced it with vodka. America faced it during Prohibition. We are still facing it now. But after more than 10,000 years, humanity has still not solved the contradiction. We know how to ferment alcohol. We know how to distill it, industrialize it, advertise it, tax it, regulate it, and sometimes ban it. What we have never fully figured out is how to keep everything we value about alcohol without paying everything it can cost. And that is where its history finally returns to us. So the next time you raise a glass, look at it for a moment. What seems ordinary is carrying more than 10,000 years of human history. It carries the memory of fermented grain shared at ancient feasts, of Sumerian brewers and Egyptian workers, of scholars refining distillation, monks making medicinal spirits, and London streets drowning in cheap gin. It carries Caribbean rum produced inside the machinery of slavery. Russian vodka taxed to finance an empire. American speakeasies hidden behind locked doors during Prohibition, and the global brands that now sit on shelves in almost every country on Earth. Few substances have traveled so deeply through human civilization. Alcohol has blessed rituals and financed governments. It has brought strangers together and torn families apart. It has inspired celebration, commerce, art, rebellion, addiction, and grief. Because alcohol has always reflected both sides of humanity, our desire for pleasure, our hunger for connection, our talent for turning discovery into industry, and our difficulty knowing when enough is enough. We learned how to make alcohol thousands of years ago. We learned how to make it stronger. We learned how to sell it, tax it, regulate it, and ban it. But there is one thing we are still trying to learn, whether we control the drink or the drink controls us.